In the village of Rudyard in Staffordshire, sitting on a hill high above Rudyard Lake, is this poor abandoned mansion. This video is going to take you on an exploration of the inside of this dilapidated mansion, and I've written a blog post for more information if you'd like an in-depth history, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it as we walk around. Believe it or not, this building is Grade 2 listed, and it was built in 1811. It's been various things over the years, from a house to a hostel to a golf club, and now it's falling down. The house is better known as Cliff Park Hall, and it was built in 1811 by John Haworth, who was a wealthy merchant. The hall cost £25,000 to build, which was a huge sum in 1811, and is the equivalent of £1.6 million today. Unfortunately, there isn't much trace of the money that was spent. In 1831, when John Haworth died, the hall was passed into the hands of Fanny Bostock, who was both his cousin and his romantic partner, which wasn't quite as weird back then as it is now. She loved the tranquility of the area, she loved the lake, she loved the grounds, so much so that when North Staffordshire Railway purchased Rudyard Lake, they tried to have open days and tried to have fetes and galas, and she really wasn't happy with people trudging up a drive and steamboats on the lake, so she took them to court to try and stop it. This led to quite a long legal battle with the North Staffordshire Railway Company, because they wanted to turn Rudyard Lake into a tourist destination, which is what it is today, and they wanted to increase the visitor access via the railway, and she saw this as a direct threat to the secluded and private nature of the lake, which it had been for decades. She said that the thousands of people that were visiting were ruining the way of life in the country. They were ruining the tranquility of the estate, and to be fair to her, they were coming and ripping the fences up, ripping the trees out, just generally being hooligans. And because of this, she actually won. They gave her a permanent injunction which stopped the North Staffordshire Railway from using the lake for commercial purposes, including offering boat tours or building any structures on the lake or promoting it as a tourist destination. This became known as the Bostock Act. Her death in 1875, though, marked a big change for the estate, and it was really the start of the downfall for it. She'd lived most of her life in the hall, and she was a spinster, so she got no heirs, so no one to inherit the property, and because of this, the property was bought and split. The person that actually purchased the hall and the estate was the Reverend Edward Boothman, and he was the husband of Fanny Bostock's niece, so he was part of the family, but because he recognised the value and potential of the property, he bought the hall and some of the land and the buildings for £14,250, which is the equivalent of about £1.3 million today. He sold off parts of the land piecemeal and in separate parcels, and then this is what started the phase of the area's development, really. Therefore, not only creating a tourist attraction of Rudyard Lake, but also making the hall itself a tourist attraction, which is quite literally the opposite of what she wanted. Because unfortunately, with Fanny's death, it also meant that the Bostock Act didn't stand anymore, and because of this, the North Staffordshire Railway Company purchased the estate in 1903, specifically to develop a golf course on the land between the hall and Rudyard Lake. So in 1904, the North Staffordshire Railway secured an Act of Parliament that allowed commercial activities on the lake, which directly overturned the Bostock Act. And this allowed them to rent out motor launches, rowing boats, and basically just advertise it as a leisure destination. By 1905, the golf course was completed, and in 1906, they officially opened Rudyard Lake Golf Club, which was the first golf club ever to be opened in North Staffordshire. The idea was to turn this hall into a new clubhouse, but this didn't materialise, and unfortunately they only added changing rooms and locker rooms. It was only by the 1920s that golf really took off and became popular, and this is when Cliff Park Hall became a residential clubhouse. It wasn't to last though, because after the First World War, and because there was more accessible golf courses being built closer to towns and cities, it began to decline. And by 1926, the golf course closed, and this meant that the hall closed too. In the early 1930s though, there was quite a transformation for the hall when it became a youth hostel, and it was quite a popular venue for young travellers and adventurers right up to 1969. The railway that still owned the hall decided to lease it out to the Youth Hostels Association, and what they did is they provided affordable accommodation for young people that were exploring the local areas and all over the country, and they were all over the place, and they were usually based in large houses like this. However, it did mean quite an update for the hall. So first of all, it was repaired quite well, so that was good. It made it withstand the test of time, but it did mean that a lot of the original features were ripped out, and they installed dormitories, communal living spaces, and things like toilets and showers and that sort of thing. In 1936, while it was still a youth hostel, George Orwell actually came to stay, and George Orwell, if you don't know, is the author of books such as 1984. And he was on a mission to explore and document the life of the working class up north. So he came up and stayed at the hall and visited the local areas, and he eventually wrote the book The Road to Wigan Pier. I've got a funny feeling that the hall was a little bit nicer than this during his stay in 1936 though. By the end of World War II, the hostel was in need of serious renovation, and the railway company didn't want to take this on, so they actually sold it to the Youth Hostel Association in 1955. And they did a massive amount of work. They fixed it, they repaired it, and they reopened it in 1958. However, despite all these renovations, it only operated as a youth hostel until 1969, and the Youth Hostel Association decided to sell the property. This is when it switched back to being a house, because it was sold to a man called Brian Daly. And it was probably this part of the hall's history that most local people have heard, because in 2013, Brian Daly, who was an elderly gentleman at this time, and a popular face because this is on a public footpath and many people had walked past and spoken to him, he was broken into and tied up and beaten about the head for a good few hours. And the people who burgled him actually stole quite a lot of valuable things like swords and suit of armour, Cromwellian spear, you know, real historic artefacts. He did survive the ordeal, but I don't think he really enjoyed living in the house much longer, and he died about 2 years later. The house was empty then, and in 2016 it was acquired by a company called Cliff Park Hall Limited. And if you want more information on any of this, all of the details are on my blog at the Red-Haired Stokey. The people that bought it did put in for planning permission, and it was granted. If someone actually had the money, this would be such an incredible place for a hotel or a spa. It sits in the most beautiful area, right above Rudyard Lake. But despite this, as of 2023, it just sits empty, broken, leaking, and completely falling down. But unfortunately, I think it's just going to end up falling down. I visited this quite a few years ago, and it wasn't in anywhere near as bad a state as it is now. It's just getting worse and worse, and the fact that the water is coming in through the roof and settling in the basement, I'm worried that it might be game over for this place. But I have written a very in-depth blog post with a lot more history and details about this hall. And if you would like to know more about local history, please check out my other videos and my website. Thank you.